Having done a few videos like this one before with a similar title, you're probably thinking that this is going to be old information. But today I wanted to start fresh again with this topic because I think there's a lot of important points that most beginner photographers really need to master. So I really want to go back to basics. I don't want to talk about too much of the points that I've talked about before in the past. And I also want to talk about some of the mistakes that beginners make in natural light settings. For those of you who are new here, my name is Kaylee June and I'm a beauty and fashion photographer. Today we're going to be discussing how to take better natural light portraits. So as a bit of a backstory, when I first started, I only ever used natural light, and actually well into my career, I only used natural light. It actually really intimidated me to walk into a studio because I didn't feel like I ever had enough practice. I didn't have my own studio at the time, and I really couldn't afford to hire the studios in Sydney, which a lot of them would go for upwards of around $600 a day and still do. I also didn't have the opportunity to have my own home studio at the time because I was living 2 hours south of Sydney, and a lot of the modeling agencies and models that I was working with were all based in Sydney and didn't want to travel down to where I was living. So my main option was natural light, and it's a really large part of how I ended up developing my photography style. Now I do want to go over this one particular point because I do feel that it has become a little bit of a myth, and it's something that I have even mentioned in previous videos before, but I really want to go over it because I feel that there's a lot more to this point than meets the eye. Now, a lot of photographers may actually tell you that the main time or the time that you should be shooting in natural light is actually within golden hour, so either very early or very late in the day. I personally believe that all photographers, especially as beginners, should learn to shoot at all different times of day because there's not always the opportunity to shoot either in golden hour in the beginning of the day or at the end of the day. I'm just going to use myself as an example here, but when I was younger, I didn't feel confident driving 2 hours into Sydney. And for those of you who live in Sydney, you'll know exactly what I mean. So instead, I often took the train to Sydney, and it still took around 2 hours to travel there, which meant if I wanted to shoot in golden hour in the morning, I would actually have to be up at about 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning and getting ready for the shoot. Not ideal, but then there was also the point that I couldn't always get up there for that time because there wasn't always regional trains at that time during the morning. So unfortunately, I had very limited options when it came to shooting in golden hour earlier on in the day. The later golden hour in the day would sometimes be okay, but it often left me coming home on a peak hour train, crammed for 2 hours on a tiny little train with all of my gear, suitcases, camera gear, everything you can imagine, and it wasn't always ideal either. Now, make no mistake, I did actually do this numerous times across my earlier career, and you just sometimes have to do what you have to do to try and succeed. But it wasn't always an ideal situation, and if I did want to aim for that later golden hour during the day, quite often I'd have a much shorter period of time to shoot before the sun went down. And if you're always aiming to shoot within that golden hour during the day, it is difficult because as a beginner, you need and want that time to experiment. You want to keep on shooting. You just don't want to shoot for an hour and be like, well, that's my day done, particularly if you're traveling 2 hours to get somewhere to shoot. And I know that this is part of being a photographer sometimes. You may only be on set for an hour, depending on who or what you're shooting. But I think in these circumstances, when you're starting out, you do need that time to experiment. So overall, my first tip on how to take better natural light portraits is to learn how to shoot at any time of day. There may also be times where you have clients that are not going to allow you to shoot earlier or later on in the day for whatever reason, and there's quite often times where you will have to shoot throughout the day at certain times. It's also another important reason why you need to learn and how you can take a little bit of the power back when it comes to knowing how you want your work to look. And now we're going to take a quick look at a diagram that I have actually created, and it's something that I've always visualized from the beginning of when I started learning how to take photos in natural light. And I think that this will hopefully help you guys visualize and see the day at certain times, how the light will look. Now, this is obviously going to change and the times are going to change depending on where you live in the world and what time of year it is, but overall the stages pretty much stay the same. Overall, learning how to shoot in each of these stages during the day will help you to become a much more well-rounded photographer. And now we're going to go through a quick breakdown of what these stages actually are. So the first stage we're going to talk about is first light, which is at the beginning of the day, or twilight, which is at the end of the day. First light is when the sun hasn't quite risen over the horizon, but you're you're working with a very blue tinged cool light. It's a really cool option if you want to have some cityscapes as your backdrop with some of the street lights still switched on, and it can also give a really moody vibe overall. Now this would be the same for twilight, so we're talking about basically the first hour of light in a day and the last hour of light in the day. It's important to know when to avoid certain stages throughout the day if you do have limitations with your equipment as well, and that's why I mentioned about having a good low light capability with your camera for this time of day, because your ISO level will likely need to be higher unless you've got a tripod, and depending on what kind of portraits you're taking, you may not want to have to shoot with a tripod, so keep that in mind for this stage of day. However, having said that, at some of those higher ISO levels you can create a really nice grain and you'll be able to get a really cool film effect as well. And then the next stage we're talking about now is golden hour. So this is the one that you guys probably already know all about, and this is the time of day when the sun is either rising or setting. So it's risen over the horizon or it's just setting, and you've got that beautiful warm golden glow. It's truly a beautiful light to shoot in. It's a very soft light, and it's also very flattering across skin tones as well. It's also quite versatile with the kinds of looks that you can get with this time of day as well, but this is why most photographers will say to you that this is a very ideal time to shoot for portraits. And I agree. I think it's one of the best times of day to get those beautiful, soft, golden shots, but it also depends on what you want. And this is why I'm going through each of these stages, because as I said, it's important to shoot at every time of day and to know what to expect when you will be shooting at different stages. The next stage we're going to discuss is the warm light stage. Now I find that this is something that a lot of people tend to skim over and tend to actually miss and not really talk about that much. It's a really lovely light to shoot in. It's quite often forgotten about, and it tends to happen just after golden hour in the mornings for about an hour or so, and just before the golden hour in the afternoons for also about an hour or so. And it just has a really nice warm tinged light. It's still a very flattering light at this stage to shoot in. The shadows aren't too harsh still, and I definitely recommend this as well if you're looking at taking portraits, because it's still very flattering on the skin tone as well. This light is often great for swimwear photographers in particular, because it can really pick up the highlights on the skin a little bit more and give that little bit more contrast as well, as opposed to golden hour light, but it still has quite a bit of warmth to it as well, which makes it a really ideal light to shoot in. Now we're going to be talking about early and late daylight. So this is kind of like the stage of a couple of hours either side of midday where the light is definitely whiter and it's a hotter kind of light, but it's definitely not as contrasted as midday light. So you are getting those harder shadows, but it is a really good time of day to start experimenting with different portraits and experimenting with darker and harder shadows without getting the really, really hard contrast that comes right at midday. You can also really experiment with different tools and different props to help you get those different kinds of shadows at this time, and it's going to really appear well on the model's face, as opposed to some of the earlier times where the shadows definitely won't be as strong. And now we're going to talk about midday light. So this is pretty much every photographer's worst nightmare, I feel. It's a very stark, contrasted light, and it is very hard to make it look flattering. But personally, I don't mind it that much. I think there's many ways that you can work with it and around it at this time of day. So in talking about these different stages throughout the day with natural light, let's look at some ways that we can work with them and not necessarily against them in terms of photographing portraits. The most important tip that I would say with each of these stages of natural light is to be aware of which direction the light is actually coming from and how it is falling across the model's face. The first thing you should master with natural light at any time of day is how to make it look even across the model's features. This is especially true with midday light, as this is when the shadows are hardest and harshest. Also try to avoid having the models wear white at this particular time of the day, because it can really overexpose and really blow out, particularly in harsh sunlight. So in mastering how to make the light look even across a model's face, this usually involves facing the model's head towards whichever direction the light is coming from. You may need to tilt the model's head up or down depending on how high the sun is at the time of day you're shooting. This is especially true for midday light, because the shadows from the nose or other features of the face can appear odd if the model's face isn't tilted high enough upwards. Also, another little tip here, be sure to count the model in if you're getting them to open their eyes, because you really don't want them to go blind, and it can also be very bright at this time of day. Learn how to get that even light on your model's face at any time of day, and then you can really experiment with different shadows and different angles. This way you've always got a natural go-to light process that is really versatile. Now let's talk about a few inexpensive tools that you can purchase to really help with shooting at different stages throughout the day. Using a reflector or a scrim is a really great way to help filter the light a little bit more throughout the day, or to add back light onto certain areas of the model's face. A scrim really helps with diffusing the light a little bit more, and they're often used at some of the hottest and brightest times during the day. A reflector will help you to add more light back into a shot, especially if you need parts or shadows to be a little bit more even, or you don't have enough light for the certain areas that you may be shooting in. Let's also talk about some of the alternative situations you can use when you have to shoot at the brightest or hottest times of the day. For example, you may be required to shoot at midday, but you may be after a softer light for your photographs. So consider using shaded light outside for your photographs, or even using window light. Both of these options can offer really beautiful and softer lighting, and it can really add a little bit more mood back into the photographs as well. And while we're talking about mood, it is really important to consider the type of mood you want your images to have. Each stage of the day can offer very different mood lighting. So keep this in mind and consider how an edgy fashion shoot, for example, would look in golden hour versus midday light and harsh shadows, or even at the beginning of the day during the first light when it's quite blue tinged and moody. One other thing I'm going to touch on quickly as well is cloudy weather. Now, I know that this is something that other photographers love, and for a lot of them, they do recommend shooting on cloudy days, and they'll probably tell you that it's one of the best lighting situations that you can shoot in. I have to say that this really depends on what kind of images you want to create. Now, does cloudy weather make it easier to create flattering portraits? Of course it does. It makes it really easy because the light is a lot softer and filtered. But does it offer as much versatility as, say, a sunny day where you can hop in and out of shadows, or go into the midday sun and take some really contrasted portraits, or even go inside to have that lovely window light? It doesn't really offer you a lot of versatility overall with your lighting situation. It can also be a little bit difficult to avoid them looking a little bit flat or washed out. This has actually been my experience in shooting with a lot of cloudy weather, and it really depends on the images that you want to take, because for certain fashion shots it would not be my ideal shooting situation, but then again, for a wedding photographer who's got a very moody, cloudy day, shots like that could turn out incredible. So like I said, it really depends on what you're after in your images. So with this video, I really wanted to talk about how you can use natural light in depth to your advantage, and I feel like some of this information often gets missed, so I hope you guys have really learned something new from this video today. Without this information, it can leave a lot of beginners feeling lost on how to achieve the natural light situations that they want in their images, and it can be hard to know where to start. So I do really hope that this has helped you guys out today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, make sure that you do, because I'll be posting a lot more content like this in future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!